If you're interested in macro photography, you've probably heard of a technique called focus stacking. This is most commonly used in close-up photography to extend the depth of field in your images for pin-sharp results. And today we're going to show you how it's done. Depth of field is determined by three factors: aperture, focal length, and distance to subject. In macro photography, the depth of field is limited for a couple of reasons. Macro lenses tend to have long focal lengths like the Sigma 105mm lens I'm using today, and you have to get in close to your subject, which leaves you with a very shallow plane of focus. This is why in macro photography we typically tend to use narrower apertures to ensure the subject is sharp from front to back, while blowing out the background into soft focus. But sometimes this isn't enough to render our entire subject in sharp focus. The solution is to shoot several images, each with tiny focus adjustments, and then use Photoshop or a focus stacking software to merge all the sharp parts together into one seamless pin-sharp image. All you need is a macro lens, a sturdy tripod to keep your camera in a fixed position for a series of exposures, and a subject that will remain perfectly still too. Even the smallest of nudges can cause some movement, so we'd recommend attaching a shutter release cable for firing shots. Set up by a north-facing window offering plenty of diffused light. Move your chosen subject into position and pop a reflector on the opposite side to bounce some light back into the shadows. Enable Live View mode to help you compose and focus your image. It's important to compose slightly wider than what you want the final composition to be, as when you blend the images in Photoshop, you will need to crop out the overlay areas at the edges of the frame. Live View is an invaluable tool when working in such a controlled environment. Squinting through the viewfinder to set the focus for each exposure will be a painful process, whereas using Live View will allow you to zoom into specific areas for more accuracy. To ensure the exposure remains the same for each shot, for straightforward blending later on, set your camera to manual mode. Set the optimum aperture on your lens, which is usually around f8 to f16. Keep the ISO low for noise-free shots, and select a shutter speed to give a balanced exposure. Use your histogram to help you. Switch your lens to manual focus and ensure any image stabilization is switched off. Select the nearest point of your subject that you want to appear in sharp focus. Zoom in using the 5x magnification button and twist the focus ring until it's pin sharp and fire your first shot. For each subsequent shot, carefully adjust the focus ring so the focus falls on a different part of your image. To ensure you get a sharp end result, you'll need to overlap the plane of focus for each frame. For our subject, we've set our first focus point on the front of the petals. Then we'll work our way towards the centre of the flower and finish up by selecting a few more points of focus at the back. The number of shots you need to take depends on your aperture and your subject. Smooth, flat objects won't require as many shots, whereas subjects with fine overlapping layers such as the details in our flower bud will prove a little trickier and will require a few more shots to produce as much depth of field as possible. With this in mind, it's best to take more photos than you think you'll need. Remember that the wider your aperture, the more images you will require. Likewise, don't be tempted to select a really narrow aperture to reduce the amount of shots required, as diffraction will set in and soften your images. Now we've got our series of images, we can transfer them onto the laptop so we can begin the final part of our stacking process.
So now you should have your sequence of images that you've just taken and hopefully on your computer. And what I'm going to do now is show you how to complete the focus stacking technique in Photoshop. And as you can see here, this is our final result, and hopefully you should have something which looks like this by the end. So if we just go up to File Open, and I'm going to open my raw files. And that should open it up into Adobe Camera Raw for us, so we can make some raw adjustments to all of the images. So to save us a bit of time, we're going to hit Select All up here, and that's going to select all of the images in our sequence so that any adjustment we make will be applied to all of our images at once. So first things first, we're going to just tweak the temperature to about 4450, and then we're going to set the exposure to +50. That's just going to brighten it up, and then also we're going to set the highlights to +60 as well. And then just to bring out some of that shadow detail in the darker area of the picture here around this flower bud, we're just going to increase the shadows and the black. So set the shadows to about 35 and then the blacks to about 48. And then lastly, we're going to just set the clarity to +24. It's just going to increase the mid-tone contrast, and then the vibrance to +14. And then I'm also going to increase the saturation as well, but I don't want to increase it too much. As you can see, we start to lose detail in some of the areas here, so I'll just bring that back to about +14. When it comes to merging all your files later on in Photoshop for the stacking part of the tutorial, you'll find that stacking loads of raw images together and merging them is going to take rather a long time and may even crash the software. So it's best to save out all the images as JPEG. So just make sure that they're all still selected, save images, and I'm going to save them in the same location, or you can save them in a new folder if you wish. I've called my images focus stacking, and then you can select the file extension here. So we'll select JPEG and make sure the quality is set to high, and then click save. And as you can see down here, that will work away in the background and save those JPEGs for you. So I'll just pause the video whilst it finishes doing that. So if you just hit done to exit Camera Raw, and then if we go to File, Open, and as you can see in our RAWs folder, we've now got all the JPEGs at the top here. So if you just click on the first one, hold Shift, click on the last one, select all of them, and then click Open to open them into Photoshop. So once you've opened all your images, what we want to do is we actually want to load them as individual layers onto one file. So if we just go back to our main starting or finishing image rather, just close that one down. I'm going to go to File, Scripts, and Load Files into Stack. And if we just select Add Open Files, and that will use all the images that you've opened up into Photoshop, and then click OK, and that will just run in the background. It may take a while, so I'm just going to pause the video whilst it runs this. So as you can see in our layers panel over here, we've got all of our images loaded up as individual layers into Photoshop. If we just scroll through, you can see all of them there. And what we're going to do is we're going to select all of them. So again, ensure the first layer in the top of the stack is selected, hold Shift, and then select the last one. And this time we're going to go to Edit, Auto Align Layers, and make sure Auto is selected and click OK. And what that does is it just makes sure that all the layers are aligned, so even the smallest of tweaks to the focus ring can sometimes knock the image slightly out of alignment. So that's just going to sort that for us, so that when it comes to blending the sharp parts of the image in a bit, it's going to be far more accurate. So again, this will take a while to run, so I'm just going to pause the video and I'll be back with you when it finishes. So as you can see, the layers have all aligned now. As you can see, that Photoshop has slightly rotated some of the images in various places to make sure they're all lined up accurately. So with all the layers still selected in the layers panel, we're going to go to Edit, Auto Blend Layers, and this is where Photoshop starts to blend all the sharp parts of the images together. So you want to make sure that Stack Images is selected and that Seamless Tones and Colours is checked, and then hit OK. And again, this may take a while. So as you can see, Photoshop has done a reasonably good job of putting together all the sharp parts of the images to give us this combined final effect. And if you have a look at the layers panel and scroll through, you can see all the individual layers and their layer masks and areas that have been used to give us this final effect. If we zoom in, so that's Control on a PC and Command on a Mac and the plus key, we can take a closer look and we can see that Photoshop has actually missed some of the areas, which can be common when photographing quite a complex subject like this, especially if some of the images are out of alignment. So the best thing to do is find the layer where we've got the petals here in the background sharp, grab the mask and paint back in to reveal these areas of detail and remove these blurred outlines. So the best way of working out which layer it is looking at your images in something like Bridge and scrolling through until you find an image that's sharp focus in the area you want. And I know from when I was looking at this last that this layer here, layer 24, has the area of details here at the top of the petal. So we just go back to Photoshop, and what we're going to do is just locate the layer, which is 24 here. bring it up to the top of the layered stack, highlight the mask and grab the brush tool and make sure the foreground colour here is set to white, and we're just simply going to paint in to reveal the sharper area of detail.